Welcome back, guys, to the Superhost Labs podcast. We are the Carwells,
I'm Emily.
and I'm Sarah, and we are, as you know, Airbnb interior designers and investors.
Yes.
Welcome. So today it's just the two of us again. We don't have a guest today. And Emily is going to be asking me a lot of questions about my original portion of the journey, which started with investing before the interior design thing got carried out. We want to start with basically all the questions that we want to ask all of our guests and encourage transparency around money specifically, and what it takes to really get involved in Airbnb. So yeah, that's the direction we're going to go. I'm going to start with my transparency first, and hopefully every guest that we have from here on out will do the same.
Yes. So, as probably a lot of you, well, maybe some of you don't know, Sarah's been in Airbnb for like a year longer than me. I really got into Airbnb because of helping Sarah design some of her own units, and that's kind of like how my Airbnb journey started. So she has more experience and has her own properties, so that's kind of where we know what's going on with you, because she's felt the pain of building her own properties. I've felt the pain of helping people build their own properties. So that's kind of how we want today to be, is kind of telling you those pain points and the parts that she loves so much and all of that. But as you guys know, we start with an Airbnb horror story. And instead of taking one that got submitted to us, because this one is all about Sarah's Airbnb journey, she is going to tell you her Airbnb horror story. So it's a big one. I remember getting the phone call about this when this happened. It was the craziest thing, and one you just like don't plan on. So
Yeah.
Sarah, go ahead.
Yeah, the pain. Emily got to hear the drama firsthand. So in all honesty, I mean, the horror stories of Airbnb are hilarious. Some of them are really painful. Others of them are not as painful and a little more manageable. Mine was a combination of an absolute disaster and a lack of experience on my part. So when I first started investing, me and my husband had originally just started with one property that we were living in, and we would rent it out on the weekends that we were traveling. And soon after, we got one property that we were running full time, and soon after that, we decided to scale up. When we scaled up from that one property, we went from one property to three properties, all of them being arbitrage, or sorry, one property to four properties, adding three, all being arbitrage. And we did all three properties back to back to back. We signed leases. They all started on the same day. And so Emily, at that point in time, took on designing one of my properties out of the three, and she helped me install, did the whole 9 yards. And then the week after we made them go live, they went live March 8th of 2020. And as we all know, March 16th of 2020, the world came to a screeching halt. All of my properties were in DFW, right downtown. And so as we know, travel stopped, especially in very populated areas. So that was kind of nightmare number one. And then the real nightmare, my real horror story, as if it could not get any worse, came July 4th of 2020. So after having a huge famine for 4 months or whatever, on July 4th, we were starting to pick up a little bit of traffic again, and I got a phone call on July 4th while I was on a boat celebrating the holiday, and July 4th is my favorite holiday. And so I'm on a boat, and I get a phone call from my management company at the time, and they had never called me, right? The idea is that they take on everything from you, and it's, they handle all the nightmares. And so when I was getting that phone call, I was like, oh my gosh, this cannot be good. So I answer it, and I'm like, just give me the bad news. And the management company at the time, she answers, and she's like, Sarah, I don't know how to tell you this. She's like, we went to go clean one of your properties today, and when the cleaners got there, everything's gone. Everything is gone. You have been completely robbed. All the furniture, all the decor, all the kitchen supplies, all the towels, all the sheets, all the rugs, everything. Everything's gone. It literally looks like this apartment is move-in ready. And my jaw just dropped.
Oh my gosh. My stomach hit the floor when that happened. I was like, are you kidding me? I was pissed. I was like, I spent a week putting this thing together and I was mad just based on that. And it was your money that you had put into it. Like, I was so mad.
Yeah, and it just got even worse from there. So after they told me it got robbed, I was like, well, thank goodness, Airbnb and Verbo have insurance attached to all of the listings, so we should be able to at least get a payout, right? Wrong. I also, at the time, had my properties listed on booking.com, and what I didn't know because I was an amateur was that booking.com didn't have the same insurance policy that Airbnb and VRBO had, which meant that I had nothing covering my butt. At the time, I don't think proper insurance existed, and the complex knew we were doing it and only required us to have regular renter's insurance. So unless I wanted to commit insurance fraud and say that I was the one who was living in that apartment that got robbed, I had no coverage, which meant that every ounce of everything that got stolen was just straight coming back out of my pocket after starting these Airbnbs in a market that was dead. And that nearly broke me. And I didn't have a Ring doorbell at the time. I had skimped on technology. I had put a half a year's salary into bringing these properties to life. I had literally put all of my savings into bringing these properties to life. Then to have them go from thinking that they were going to make cash flow over $1,000 a month to having them cash flow basically nothing, to then getting robbed, to then not being covered from that robbery, to then having to refurnish them in a market that was still dead. And I was like, oh, is this my test into entrepreneurship? Like, is this the world asking me if I really want it? And it was an absolute horror story. I mean, that was it. I mean, I filed a police report. The police said that a few other Airbnbs had been hit in the area. Same thing with booking.com, where they used a burner phone and a fake ID, and they stole everything, and they pulled up a moving truck to an apartment complex, which is not alarming because people are moving into the complex and moving out of the complex all the time, and they took it, and that was it. I just had to refurnish everything and hope that I was making the right decision. And it all worked out. I mean, it kind of worked out, but we're through it. We're past it now, but that is my Airbnb absolute horror story.
Yeah, and that's like big rookie lessons, right?
Yeah.
Like, you went into it wanting to, you put half of your salary, so it's not like you put no money into it, but you didn't want to like splurge for the technology, or you didn't even think to splurge for the technology because you hadn't had anything like that happen before. And it was just all these, like, you were new and you just dove right into it and didn't have somebody like, now you tell that story and everybody else is like, oh, well, now I'm going to make sure I have a Ring doorbell. I'm not going to go through booking.com. It was just like a big learning lesson.
Huge learning lesson.
And I feel like I cheat a little bit because I like learned that from Sarah. Now, I would never like put up a unit without it, but before that happened, I probably would have. I would have been like, I don't want to spend the money on a Ring doorbell because that's how much money, and then sometimes you have to pay for subscriptions for those cameras and all those things, but it is worth it in the long run to invest that money at the very beginning. And that was just something that unfortunately Sarah had to learn the hard way.
And I mean, all good things take sacrifice, right? So it's one of those things that now looking back, I'm like, man, I'm so thankful it's part of my journey. It taught me so much. I am obviously, as you know, and as you guys will learn, that I am a very run into it without hesitation and let's learn as we go. And so this is definitely very on brand for me. So yeah, all things looking back, I'm thankful that it happened. I'm thankful that we got to learn the lesson. I'm thankful that it was in an arbitrage unit that cost me $4,000 to put together, as opposed to a property that cost me $50,000 to put together. But yeah, don't skimp out on the technology, friends. Get your Ring doorbells, and also do not put your properties on booking.com unless you are double, triple vetting the people who are coming through.
Yeah. Big lesson to not skimp on the front end on that one. And sorry that it had to be you who learned it, but I'm glad I won't make that mistake.
That's never happening again.
Yeah.
So those of you getting into it, just know that the likelihood of that happening to you, if you have a Ring doorbell and are not booking on booking.com, you are covered. Don't worry. That is a completely avoidable situation. But I mean, it just goes to show it is always a good idea to hire people to help you get started who have experience, because that experience is invaluable.
Oh, yeah, for sure. So, like I said, I feel like I cheat a little bit with Sarah. So, I get to ask her all the questions, which we're going to do now for you guys, because Sarah's experience, she has now you've had Airbnbs for.
Since 2019.
Yeah, because you started with your own.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that's kind of what we're going to start with, is where Sarah started, because everybody has a different why for why they get into Airbnb. Like, it used to be, I think we touched on this last week, it used to be just people renting out a room in their house or renting out their own homes because they were going on vacation a lot. So I want Sarah to kind of tell you guys her why for why she initially started Airbnb, and then why you decided to scale it.
Yeah. Ooh, good question. Okay, so originally, way before we started Airbnb, my husband was in insurance, or still is in insurance, to be honest. And he has always been 3 years ahead of me. He's 3 years older than me, so he graduated college 3 years before me. He started in the workforce 3 years before me. He started his own business 3 years before I did, and so he is my best friend. He also has this role of mentorship in a lot of ways. And so we made an agreement, not knowing how this was going to play out, that at the time he was making significantly more money than I was. And so we had an agreement that he would make the money, I would make the money grow. And we didn't know what that meant at the time. So we started exploring some ideas. When we finally moved in together, we started renting the room out, or my apartment out, on the weekends that him and I would travel. So we traveled a ton, probably 50% of the weekends out of the month. So 2 out of 4 weekends we were gone, and it was a 1-bed, 1-bath apartment. And we were like, okay, so we're paying rent on this place. Why not try and Airbnb it out? And at the time, we didn't know anything about legalities or regulation or anything, and so we just went for it. And so we would post our apartment online, and no professional photos. It was like one night we took iPhone photos. I'm in interior design, so it was already a well-designed space. And we just took these iPhone photos. We posted them on Airbnb for a trip that we were leaving for in 2 days. And within 5 minutes, our apartment booked the whole weekend. And we were like, time out. So after that, after renting for a little while, we asked the management company if we could sign a second lease in the same apartment complex and try it out full time. And we did. And that was in October of 2019. So October of 2019, we took $3,500, and we opened up a second one. And our why we chose Airbnb was, one, we kind of fell into it to a certain degree, but 2, it created passive income that was ultimately paying for our travels. And then if we could scale it, the idea was that, 1, we love traveling, 2, we like passive income. And so this was like a marriage of both of those things. And 3, on a larger scale, it was a place where we could put our money, as opposed to putting it in the stock market or other investment avenues, that this one seemed to fit who we were a little bit better. So that's kind of what started our why. It was a way to grow our money, and it was a way to grow our vacation homes. So
yeah, that is one of the nice things. It not only paid your rent, right? Mm-hmm. It also gave you extra income to then fund the traveling that you guys wanted to do anyways. So yeah, okay. So you kind of touched on this in that, but outside of the one that you were living in, what was the investment that you put into that first one that you started in the same building?
Yeah. So it was a 1-bed, 1-bath unit. It was the least expensive 1-bed, 1-bath unit in the complex. So the security deposit to put it down in that complex was $250. Then we had to pay first month's rent right away, which was a prorated amount because we started in the middle of the month. So I think all said and done, the upfront cash for rent and security deposit was under $1,000. And then we spent $3,500 on furniture and about $500 or $600 on supplies. So all in, we were under $5,000 getting it started. And from October until March of 2020, that puppy was bringing in up to $2,000 cash flow or profit a month after we would pay all of our expenses. At the time, we were managing it ourselves. We were also cleaning it ourselves. So I worked like 5 minutes away downtown Fort Worth, and I would go to work in the morning. I would drive back to the apartment at lunch. I would turn it over. I would clean it. And then I would go back to work, and someone would check out at 10. I'd go in at noon, clean it until 1, come back, and someone would check in at 4. And so that's kind of, yeah, cost me about $5,000 to get started, and we started profiting month 1.
Yeah. And then you touched on this. So you were managing it yourself.
Mm-hmm.
You were cleaning it yourself. So how much time out of your day, because like you were working 40 hours a week, how much time out of your day did it take? And then after you were able to automate it, because you ended up getting a management company when you scaled, and then that in turn came with like cleaners that you didn't have to run back and forth. So did your profit drop drastically after you automated it? And was it worth like the amount of time that you were taking to manage and clean it?
Yeah. Yes. Overall, yes. So the cleaning obviously took the most amount of time, so we were super happy to automate that. The management, we definitely went through some hiccups. That was a big learning curve as well, which I'm sure you listeners may resonate with a lot of this, where if you do want to hire a management company, one, you're hiring the management company to automate the nightmare calls, right? Like, it doesn't take that long to manage a property. A lot of people will say it takes between 1 and 3 hours. At the time when I was managing my property, I didn't know about any of the automation software, right? I didn't know Hospitable. I didn't know Price Labs. I didn't know Turnover. Like, I didn't know any of that. So I really wanted to hire a management company out the gate to help me learn all of those things, because I just didn't know. And I was working a full-time job. I didn't have the time to learn. So I hired a management company, and it wasn't a good one, if we're being honest. I felt like I was managing the management company, and so at first I didn't think the management was worth it. I appreciated that the management was communicating with the cleaners, and the portion that really helped was taking away the cleaning, so that I didn't have to run home every single day on my lunch hour. But the actual guest communication, I felt like lost that personal touch almost immediately. So the first management company that I hired, I at that point had been managing them myself for like 6 months, and I had a superhost status. I had 5-star reviews. I had 80+% occupancy rates across the board. And then when I hired a management company, that immediately dropped. I lost my superhost status. I was getting bad reviews. The customer service just wasn't there. Wasn't the way that I wanted it to be. And that was frustrating, but I just didn't know if that was industry standard. It was like, okay, you hear people say if you can automate something and you can find somebody else who will do it 80% of what you will do it, then it's worth automating. And so I was like, okay, is this 80%? Is it not? I was kind of like following that train of thought. And I really should have cut ties sooner than I did. I feel like I probably lost out on quite a bit of money sticking with that management company for a while, thinking that I could like fix it. So ultimately, I ended up switching management companies and trying out a new one. And the management company that I'm still with now does a fantastic job. I think that, they charge me the same amount that the previous management company charged me, and they add a lot more value. So since we've switched, I've gained superhost status back. They've implemented all the automation into all of my properties, so people are getting immediate responses. They're getting responses that seem like it's from a real person, or they make it very obvious when it's not. They're saying, hey, this is an automated message, like, we'll get right back to you. And they just help me on a lot. They're offering me solutions, I guess, instead of me offering them solutions. So I now am not plugged in at all with the guest communication in my own properties, which is amazing. So yeah, now worth it. The 20% or 20% that I pay them is absolutely worth it, in my opinion, because of the random 2 a.m. phone calls. Automating it, like when other people talk about automation and management, it really only takes a few minutes a day once you automate it. But I always tell people you will have 1 nightmare client per month per property. So as you scale, and now we're at 6 properties, you're dealing with a nightmare at least once a week. And I don't want to be dealing with that nightmare. Like, I don't want the once a week 2 a.m. phone call that someone is locked out, or someone is too drunk to get home, or someone has gotten stuck in a driveway, or can't find parking, or gets towed, or like whatever the case may be, whatever the nightmare situation may be. I love that they handle it, and I love that they are also always increasing my overall ROI. Like, they just handle it, right? So my advice with management companies as a whole is to make sure that you're getting extra value out of them aside from them just automating it for you and like putting it on the back burner.
Yeah. And one of the biggest values I think for you specifically is because you want to scale. Like not everybody wants to scale. They're fine with just having like their one or two and they're fine with taking that on. But if you want to eventually have 10, 12 properties, having a management company, although it does cut into your cash flow, makes it so you can get those properties up and running. Because like if you were trying to manage your properties during the time where we're doing this and where you were putting this house together that we're currently in, it wouldn't have happened as quickly because you would have been dealing with all that stuff. So they do bring value in that way if you pick the right management company. I think I've seen the back end of all of that. And yes, you have to pick the right one, but I guess the pay cut was worth it in the end.
Yeah, definitely worth it in the end. And I mean, you've got to decide that for yourself, right? It's like if you are looking to maximize your cash flow, right? And you want to like bring in as much cash as possible to then put on another property, especially at the beginning, it makes a lot of sense for you to manage it yourself so you can just absorb all of that and be able to like scale faster. For me, I knew that if I was seeing that income, then to hand it off down the road, that was going to be a really hard pill to swallow. And they're arbitrage properties, so they're inherently less profitable overall. So I don't know. We'll see how the game changes as we get further into this, but so far I've just been more than pleased with having a management company. I enjoy the support. I enjoy spending the time that I would spend on managing my properties elsewhere. I think that I'm more valuable elsewhere than managing my properties.
Yeah, it's kind of what your priorities are. If your priority is freedom of time, like truly passive income, then the management company is worth it.
Yep, absolutely.
Okay, so after you opened that first one in the same building, you scaled, which you talked about in March, which is the property that one of the properties I helped you design. So when you were choosing to scale, was your priority the location? Was your priority, I want to do this and have the least amount of money put into scaling? Like number of properties? How did you prioritize scaling?
Well, I sucked at scaling.
Well, like looking back now, obviously hindsight's 20/20.
Yeah.
But
so originally, when we had the first 1-bed, 1-bath running for 6 months, and we were like, "Holy cow, this is consistently booking out." We were impressed all the way around. It was like magic, right? Like I'm sure a lot of you who have properties, the first property when you put it online and you start getting bookings immediately, you're like, "This is magic." Like this is. Like I don't have to do any real marketing, right? The Airbnb platform, the VRBO platform all together is bringing me enough traffic to not only pay rent, but have this like surplus of profit at the end. And so I just saw the magic in that. And I mean, Emily knows, everyone knows my greatest asset and my biggest weakness is the fact that I am overly optimistic. I love that about myself. I hate that about myself. And so at the time, being inexperienced and ready to run through a brick wall in this Airbnb game, I did not care where or how. I just wanted to scale. So my husband and I had set this financial plan when we had first gotten married to live on his income, save all of mine. So at the time we didn't know how I was going to grow money. I just knew that I was going to grow money. And so we had lived on his income. We had saved all of my income. So I had a year's worth of a salary saved up. I took half of that salary that was in my bank account. I took $20,000 and was like, okay, we're going to scale. And so the management company that I no longer am with, but at the time was working with, had connections with a few properties in Dallas and that were open to Airbnb. And so me with my blind optimism was like, don't care what the property looks like, don't care where it is. I'm just ready to like learn, right? I'm ready to like get on this train and just accept the failures as they come. So I got 3 properties in Dallas. The one that I had existing was in Fort Worth. And so we scaled those 3 properties in March of 2020. We spent, $15,000 on 3 1-bed, 1-bath apartments. And then the other 5 went towards, I don't know, the deposits and things like that. And those properties did not, well, for one, I mean, COVID hit right after they scaled. So those properties did not perform. Just point blank, we were not in the negative, we were not in the positive, we were in the black all year long after running them from March until March of the following year. Like when I had to renew my lease, I was looking at my overall profit for the year, and it was like, especially after getting robbed and having to reinvest another $5,000 into the property, I was at zero. I was still at zero. Not even at zero, I was still at negative 25. Like I hadn't made any money at all. I had paid rent, I had tenants, and that was it. That was wildly discouraging.
Yeah. This is a spin-off question that's not on here. Do you think, because like I know the location of the property, and obviously we know how much you invested in them, which for a 1-bed, 1-bath, it doesn't have to be like a crazy amount of money, but do you think the amount that you invested in the location had an effect on the kind of tenants that you had, and
Yes.
why? Like obviously COVID contributed to not being profitable, but do you think like the location and the kind of people that you were getting based on the amount that you spent was a direct reflection of that?
Yes. So I touched on this on a TikTok yesterday where I was like, look, there is some magic in mid-tier markets. When I went from Fort Worth, which I consider a mid-tier market because the competition is a lot like now I understand that the competition level is a lot lower in Fort Worth than it is in Dallas. I was walking into Dallas with only having 6 months of experience in Fort Worth, not understanding that I was going up against way more experienced competitors. I mean, I should have known that, right? Because we were just starting to design for people who were also doing the same thing that we were doing in Dallas. And just the amount of competition there, especially in the 1-bed, 1-bath arbitrage market there, we were going in at the bottom of the totem pole, right? So I wasn't stalking my competition. I didn't understand that other people who were doing arbitrage in Dallas for 1-bed, 1-baths were getting deals on penthouses downtown. And I was walking into an apartment that was in a being gentrified area with a complex that had absolutely no amenities in a market that wasn't travel friendly. So now looking back, I'm like, I mean, I wouldn't have signed a lease at that apartment. Now looking back, if somebody were to have come to me and be like, look, here's an arbitrage opportunity, I would be able to run those numbers and be like, no, this, like, the rent either needs to be $400 cheaper or no, just no. Like, we can't compete in this market.
Yeah, with or without COVID, I think that would be your same reaction.
Yeah.
Now.
Yeah. And now we look at, we design for people who are still doing the arbitrage thing in Dallas, and they're spending $3,900 on rent for a 3-bed, 3-bath, and it's luxury, right? They're spending $20,000+ on decor and furniture for the 1 unit, and they have success, right? Like, you can be successful in that market. You just need to understand your competition. Like, for example, I had a guest when I had those units in Dallas who literally put a bullet hole through my bathroom door, and I had to replace the bathroom door. Like, the clientele that it was drawing in because of the market forcing me in a certain price point, which the market will, like, it doesn't matter how well you designed it. If you don't have something that's comparable to the people who are charging a lot more, you're just going to have to charge less to get guests in there. And the guests that were paying the price that I had to charge because of the location of my property were inherently also ruining it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, obviously, like, your design can make all the difference, but the location is such a huge factor in it, because if you're in a luxurious area, you get to charge luxurious prices.
Yeah.
And your furnishings then have to reflect the luxury of the area, which so it all kind of ties together.
Yeah.
Okay. So we've obviously talked about COVID. I think COVID is like a huge factor in because of just the timing that you started yours. But you did talk about you were in the negative because of what you put into the units, but you were still paying rent every single month. So you were still getting enough people into your units, even though travel had come to a dead stop where you were still paying rent. You weren't like in the negative as far as paying your bills.
Right. I was in the black. So I wasn't paying anything out of my pocket. But I wasn't putting anything back in my pocket. I just was $20,000 less wealthy, $25,000 less wealthy.
Obviously is not ideal, but like looking back at it, even at a time when nobody was traveling, you were still making money. So like at a time when people are actually traveling,
Right.
like if that situation hadn't have happened, it really could have been such a successful thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we definitely would have made profit, right? But the type of clientele that we were dealing with too, just I don't know that it would have been worth the profit, right? Like people say, not all money is good money, and I completely agree. Like when we, and also like, you know, I wasn't making any money back in that first year because of all these, you know, outstanding circumstances, but I still had furniture, right? So, you know, in that year, I was like, okay, well, I'm just going to write out my lease, because in the lease that I agreed that if I ever broke that lease, I had to pay out the rest of my rent. So it was either like just stay in the black for a year and keep paying the rent and allow other people to pay it and just accept that you're not going to make profit, or like pay to get out of it and hope that you can find something better. And so after that year, I found more arbitrage deals in Fort Worth, because my Fort Worth property that I had originally, even through COVID, was still making profit. So some of the properties in Dallas that wouldn't make rent, my property in Fort Worth would make up for it in the profit that it made to make rent. And the clients there, or my guests there, were just well behaved. They were just a better clientele. They weren't trashing or stealing everything. So then I moved all my properties to Fort Worth. And when I moved all my properties to Fort Worth in March of 2021, everything changed. Everything that I thought was going to happen in March of 2020 came to life in March of 2021. Like getting through COVID and all the chaos that brought, all the lessons that brought, March of 2021 was like a fresh start, a new leaf.
Breathe a sigh of relief. Like we made it through.
Yeah. And I had all the furniture still, right? Like, you know, so that was transitioning them to Fort Worth really didn't cost me. I mean, I spent a couple of grand to make it more luxurious because these spaces were larger and I had seen some of the flaws that I had in my properties already. So I spent a couple more grand after spending $25,000 to make sure that I was offering a quality product. And then when we moved them to Fort Worth, luckily during that whole era, Texas was one of the first people to kind of open their doors back up, and that was very beneficial for us specifically, which allowed our travel traction to increase much faster than the rest of the country. So we saw people starting to roll in. I had better locations, I had higher clientele, I had more travel, and all of a sudden we started seeing the numbers that we had been looking for an entire year, and it was the sweetest relief.
Yeah. Okay, so this I'm going to talk specifically like numbers on when you scaled and how much, like, because I helped you design one. So for those units, it was a 1 bed, 1 bath, and you said 15 grand. Furnishings we spent 4 because you obviously still had supplies, so that last grand per unit went to supplies. And that's kind of how we started with our designing for other people. That's like the budget that we started with, which you can furnish and make a place look decent in, right? But then comparing that to your property in Fort Worth that you lived in, you ended up spending
Like 10 grand.
10, I was going to say between 10 and 12, I would say, on that property. I think it's important to talk about like the difference in those two properties, because you can furnish a 1 bedroom, 1 bath for 4 grand and get it functional.
Mm-hmm.
But what's the difference in how those properties are profitable, the kind of clientele that you get, where you price them, how much they're booked, stuff like that. I think that's like an important thing to talk about.
I agree. Good question. Okay, so for me, and I'm sure for a lot of hosts who are either considering getting into Airbnb or are in the Airbnb game, it's so easy to get caught up on that front end number, right? You're like, you've worked so hard for this capital that you now want to invest in something, and it's like really hard to detach from it. And so when I first was starting, I was going into it being like, okay, how little can I spend in here to then turn a profit? Like I was trying to like save money on the front end and earn the maximum amount of money on the back end. And now my mindset is totally different, right? I'm like, I am much less concerned about the front end number. Let me figure out how to get whatever it requires to get the highest ROI on the back end, right? When I'm going into any market at this point, when we are advising people who are design clients, we are paying very close attention to the competition because we need to not only match them, but beat them. So there's just a lot more upfront research that I do. At the time, we were really trying to figure out, we love design. And a part that we haven't even talked about on this podcast is like, while everything was syncing with my own properties, I still believed in it, right? Like I was like, I know this works. I know it works. I've seen it work. I saw it work pre-COVID. COVID is a one-off. It's really like shown us what it's going to look like if the travel industry ever comes to a halt again. Like this is kind of like the 2008 for the housing market of the Airbnb market, especially for people in the cities. I mean, people who are out in the country really saw a boom throughout COVID, but like for us, it was terrible. So anyway, the first 1 bed, 1 bath we had that we spent $3,500 on furnishings. We also had our own apartment that we were living in that was the luxury unit in that complex, right? So we had an Airbnb that was in the least expensive 1 bed, 1 bath. We spent $3,500 on it. We were living in another 1 bed, 1 bath in the same complex that was $500 more a month in rent, and we spent $10,000 to $12,000 furnishing it because I had a dream, right? I told Ethan when we were getting married, I was like, look, if we're gonna do this like downtown city life, I know eventually one day we're going to push out into, a more remote location and we'll settle down and, all this. I was like, but in this era of our life, I want the penthouse. I want the skyline view. I want the expensive apartment. We can afford it. Let's just, for me as an interior designer, that's like my space is the thing that is most important to me. So I will give up having the fancy car. I will give up having the fancy clothes. I will not buy designer anything. I want to spend more money on my environment. So we rented this penthouse. I like to call it the poor people's penthouse because it's not an actual penthouse, but it is the fanciest apartment in the complex. And it has 2 full walls of windows, floor to ceiling, that faces the downtown Fort Worth skyline. It is gorgeous. It is by far my favorite space that I've ever lived in to date. And we decked it out, we did the whole thing. We bought the nice furniture. We lived there for 2-ish years. And then when we decided to scale it a little bit more, I'm like, okay, well, let's put this property on Airbnb. The complex is okay with us doing it. And I just didn't know. I didn't know what to anticipate. I knew that, that area was good. I knew the numbers that we were seeing on the other apartment, but I didn't know if we were going to see a higher profit with rent being $500 more expensive. And the only thing that was different was the view and the furniture. I just didn't know how much of an impact that would have. So when we started running that property alongside the property that we had been running for 1.5 years at that point, we were pleasantly surprised that not only was it making up for the difference in rent, but we were making almost double the profit on that property than we were the other one. So for me, I was like, okay, wait. So I had to spend double on the front end, but on the back end, regardless of the increase in rent, I am making double. And the clientele that's coming into these properties is extremely respectful. Like they are just, one, thrilled with the product because it's high quality, right? It's a space we've been living in. So the kitchen is fully stocked. The mattress is extremely comfortable. Everything. We didn't cut any corners because we were living in this space. So it was just the most well-rounded experience I had given anyone at that point within my own properties. And all across the board, I was like, oh, I'm never doing anything but luxury again. Never mind. I will spend the extra on the front end. It just removed that anxiety of putting the money into it on the front end to receive that quality guest experience on the back end. So for those of you who are watching and are terrified to invest more money on the front end, trust us when we say it's worth it.
Yeah, I think this ended up reflecting in the ones that we were designing for other people too. When we started, we were like, we can do the lowest budget possible. And we still gave them a quality product in the end. It was still functional for their guest. But as time went on and we learned through your properties, we started increasing and kind of suggesting that people increase their budgets for furnishing because it made such a difference in their profit on the back end. And especially for newer hosts, usually the the hosts that we were working with that had multiple properties, they all understood. They're like, okay, if we're increasing the budget, these are like the main things that we want to make gorgeous or the most comfortable, things like that. Like people who are experienced hosts understood it. It was really talking to the new people getting into the space and being like, it's worth it to put it in on the front end, because we've seen people do, and you did both, right? Like you have that exact experience of, I'm going to put the least amount in possible, and it still is functional.
Yeah.
Like you can throw a bed frame and a mattress and a couch into a place and it's still functional. People can still stay there, but it's going to reflect in a lot of other things other than just your profit, right? Like replacing a door because of a bullet hole, things like that.
Getting robbed.
So it really does make a big difference. It's just how you want to like run your property and the kind of people that you want in your property. So I guess if you have the capital up front, if you don't have it and you're just trying to get it off the ground, use that first property to then build up your profit, to then put more money into the second one. Like if you're just trying to get your foot in the door, don't like stop because you don't have that, but just know that there is going to be things that you deal with the less that you invest into your property.
Definitely. I mean, the market determines what you're going to be able to charge, right? Like unless you're spending an extravagant amount on design and you are really leveraging that to impact your pricing, the market's going to tell you what you can charge. So just beware of it. Just understand your competition, understand their price point, understand the struggles that come along with different clienteles and what that'll do to your property, and make a smart decision. Make a more educated decision than I made at the beginning.
Yeah. I have one last question that you kind of touched on earlier when you said the first time you listed your property, you did iPhone photos. And now it is exclusively professional photography.
Yes.
And we learned that with some people that we worked with, but what is the difference between like getting professional photography and iPhone photos for you, like when people are looking at your property?
Yes. I cannot stress this enough. It is just inexcusable, in my opinion, to not have professional photos. There was a big learning curve for me at the beginning. I was treating Airbnb as a side hustle, right? Like my main gig was architecture. I was working at an architecture firm. That was where what was putting bread on my table. And this was a side hustle experiment, and I was treating it as a side hustle experiment. I was not treating it as a business, right? That was a whole gap that I had to bridge in my brain. And so, you post these iPhone photos, and yes, by all means, if you want to like test it out with your own home and you want to throw it on the market, like please, like don't let this be the thing that's like holding you back. But professional photography costs between $150 to $300 to make it happen. I mean, this house, $300, and that $300 is, I can't even explain to you how much it's worth doing that. I don't care if you have to put it on a credit card, just get the professional photos. Like that is your biggest marketing tool. Like nowadays, I mean, a picture is worth 1,000 words with Airbnb, and people have to be able to imagine what it's going to be like staying at your property based off of those photos. Like they are not emotionally attached to this property like you are at all whatsoever. So if your photos aren't translating that you are a professional, that you are taking this seriously, that you are a serious host who treats this like a business and offers this professional experience, then people are looking at it and they're like, oh no, I'm dealing with Grandpa Joe down the road who's got this vacation home who like just wants to make an extra buck and he doesn't really care about me. I mean, Airbnb's done studies where you make 15% more on average if you have professional photos. Like that, you're making back what you spent on your photos in 1 month.
Yeah.
On a low-end property.
Our colleague yesterday, I think, said in a meeting, we eat with our eyes first. So, and I do this when I'm booking Airbnbs for me to stay in. If it doesn't look cute or if the photos don't look nice, I'm not even stopping on that property. Your very first photo, if it's not like a professional looking photo that really shows like exactly what the property is going to feel like, I'm not even stopping on
it. Yeah, I agree. I absolutely agree. Yeah, I tell people all the time, I'm like, look, especially if you've got properties that have any sort of seasonality too, like Have a photographer come in the winter. Have a photographer come in the summer. Like, people need to know what to expect, and the only way, or your biggest translation, is your photos. It's just not worth skipping out on. And don't even try and tell me that your iPhone photos are comparable. I mean, if you're not a photo snob, maybe you can't see the difference. There is a difference.
There is a difference.
There is such a difference.
These new iPhones can do a lot. It's not the same.
No.
It's not even close.
Nope.
So don't, like, that. If that's one thing that I
one
just
takeaway.
can't. Yeah. Do not take the photos on your, well, okay. If you have no other choice, sure, but put it on a credit card or something. Just get the professional photography done.
Yeah.
Your property
or
looks so
offer a
much better.
photographer the first weekend. Like, be like, look, you can stay
Yeah.
on my property for free this weekend before I put it on the market if you just take the photos. Like, take a staycation, come stay, take the photos. It's a trade. Use bartering. Like, it's just one of those. It's one portion of this industry that, I mean, we were looking at a property yesterday with a client. I digress, but we were looking at a property yesterday with a client in a relatively remote area in Wisconsin, and her, like, adjacent competitors around the lake, not a single one of them has professional photos. I was like, you could do a crap job designing this, an absolute crap job, and if you just have professional photos, you immediately are putting yourself in the 90th percentile.
Exactly.
Immediately. So, anyway, it's not a side hustle, it's a business, and you need to treat it as such.
Yes. So, those are all my questions.
Oh, wow. We got through it all. Now you guys know all my deep, dark secrets of how much of a struggle bus it was at the beginning.
Be like me. Now we all get to cheat off of Sarah's test and have at least, there's always going to be, you're always going to have your own experience, and there's always going to be something that you learn through your own personal journey. But if even my journey in Airbnb, Sarah's journey, can help somebody else have like a leg up before they dive into this, we're happy to share the stories.
Yeah. And fantastic point, Emily. I like cannot stress this enough. Like, you asked me about why at the beginning, right? What was my why? And my why for Airbnb has always been the same, right? It's like the passive income and the freedom of time. The why for Carwell at first was a band-aid over a sinking ship in 2020. I mean, we started this in 2020 because I wasn't going to scale and I wasn't making any money, and I still wanted to be in the Airbnb space. Emily had just graduated with her master's. No one was hiring, and both of us were like sitting there twiddling our thumbs being like, we're screwed. Let's be screwed together.
That mountain of student loan debt before they decided to push them off was just staring at me.
Yeah. And so anyway, throughout 2020, we created Carwell Design to like plug in with other hosts, add value to other hosts, take advantage of using those other hosts as mentors to inherently make our own Airbnb investment game better. And so the why behind this brand that we are in the process or have already created between the two of us is truly kind of our passion project where we've gone through it, we've felt the pain, we've learned a lot, we've fallen flat on our faces over and over and over again, and now we're getting real good at it. And we want to make you good at it. So that's kind of the purpose of us being here. We want to kind of pull back the curtain on all this stuff, and we don't want to glamorize it. We don't want to give false expectations about it, but we do want to encourage you to do it because it's amazing. It's changed our lives in a lot of ways. It's built us up as humans. It's created insane passive income now. And we want to just pour that back into you because we're happy and it's been fulfilling, and we want that for everybody else.
Yep. We've got some solutions to some problems, and we want to share those solutions with people.
Yes.
So
let us cry for you.
Yes.
That's what we like to say.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Well, thank you guys for listening to yet another episode with the Carwells.
Yes. And absolutely. Again, if you've got some Airbnb horror stories, the link will be in our bio for you to share those. We want to continue pulling back that curtain on what can happen, what can go wrong in the Airbnb world, how we can avoid those things within our own Airbnb strategies, and just have larger conversations about cost, investment, upfront time, money, energy, all the things. So thank you guys for tuning in. And again, I mean, if you need any help designing or bringing your Airbnb to life, we are here for that as well, as always. Links are all in our bio.
Absolutely. Send us an email if you want to be on the podcast. If you're in the Airbnb world and you have knowledge to give, send an email to carwelldesign@gmail.com.
Beautiful. All right, guys.
Thanks,
we'll see you later.
See you next time.
Bye.